The wind howled like a living thing as it tore through the mountain pass, carrying with it sheets of snow so thick that Arya could barely see her own hands stretched out before her. Every breath felt like swallowing shards of ice, each inhalation burning her lungs as the temperature continued its merciless descent into the kind of cold that killed quickly and without ceremony. She stumbled forward, her legs barely responding to the commands her fading mind sent them, her thin dress now frozen, stiff against her skin, like armor made of frost. Behind her, the footprints she had made were already disappearing under fresh snowfall, erasing any evidence that she had ever existed at all, which was exactly what Marcus had intended when he brought her up here and left her to die. The memory of his face was still fresh, still sharp enough to cut through even the numbing cold that threatened to pull her under into sleep and then death. Marcus, her supposed fated mate, the one the moon goddess herself had chosen for her, standing there with eyes as cold as the storm around them, telling her that she was nothing more than a mistake, a weak Omega, who would only bring shame to his family's name. His father was the alpha of the Silvercrest Pack, one of the most powerful in the Northern Territories, and Marcus was heir to that throne of power and violence. For 3 years, she had believed in their bond, had felt the mate pull between them, even when he treated her with casual cruelty, had convinced herself that once they completed the mating ritual, everything would change, and he would finally see her worth. Instead, he had driven her up into these killing mountains during the worst storm of the decade, held her face between his hands with a gentleness that mocked every tender moment she had imagined for them, and told her that he had found his true mate, a strong beta female from a neighboring pack who could give him powerful heirs and political connections that actually mattered. Arya had begged, had pleaded, had reminded him of every moment they had shared, every promise he had whispered against her skin, every time the mate bond had sung between them, with that undeniable recognition that this person was meant to be yours, and you were meant to be theirs. He had laughed, actually laughed, and told her that the mate bond was nothing more than biology, a trick of pheromones and instinct that could be overcome by anyone with sufficient willpower and ambition. Then, he had gotten back in his truck, turned it around, and driven away down the mountain, leaving her standing there in her thin party dress, because they had supposedly been going to a celebration in the next territory over, or so he had told her when he picked her up that evening with that rare smile that made her stupid enough to believe that maybe tonight would be different. If you are enjoying this story of survival and discovering hidden strength in the darkest moments, please like this video, and let me know in the comments what you think Arya should do when she makes it down from this mountain, because something tells me this Omega is stronger than anyone realizes. The cold was doing something strange to her now, something that felt almost like warmth spreading through her limbs, which some distant part of her mind recognized as the beginning of hypothermia, the stage where your body starts shutting down non-essential systems, and your brain begins playing tricks on you as it slowly starves for oxygen. She had maybe hours left, possibly less, and yet something inside her refused to simply lie down in the snow and let the mountain take her. Every Omega instinct she possessed screamed at her to submit, to accept this as her fate, to understand that if even her fated mate deemed her unworthy of life, then surely the universe agreed. But beneath those trained and conditioned responses, there was something else, something that felt ancient and powerful, and absolutely furious at the idea of dying here like discarded trash. Arya's foot caught on something hidden beneath the snow, and she went down hard, her hands plunging into a drift so deep it swallowed her arms up to the elbows. The impact drove what little breath she had remaining from her lungs, and for several long moments she simply knelt there, gasping and shaking, feeling the last of her strength draining away into the frozen ground. This was it then. This was where her story ended. 23 years old and dead. In the mountains, because she had been stupid enough to love someone who saw her as nothing more than an inconvenient obligation that needed to be disposed of quietly. Her parents were already gone, both killed in a rogue attack when she was 15, and she had no siblings, no extended family who would ask questions about her disappearance. Marcus had planned this perfectly, had waited until she was completely isolated and dependent on him, had made sure that when she vanished, no one would care. Enough to investigate. But as the darkness crept in at the edges of her vision and her heart began to slow, something happened that Arya could not explain or understand. Heat bloomed in the center of her chest, sudden and fierce, and entirely wrong for someone dying of exposure, spreading outward through her body like wildfire catching in dry timber. Her eyes, which had been drifting closed, snapped open, and she saw that her hands buried in the snow were glowing with a faint golden light that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. The snow around her fingers was melting, turning to water that steamed in the frigid air, and as she watched in shock and confusion, the light grew brighter, stronger, pushing back against the cold that had been killing her moment by moment. Ancient power, old as the first wolves who walked on two legs and older still, surged through Arya's veins with a force that made her cry out in pain and wonder. Somewhere deep in her genetic memory, locked away, behind generations of dilution and forgetting, was the blood of the lost royal line. The original shifters who had ruled all wolfkind before the great fragmentation scattered the packs across the world and reduced their mighty empire to legend and fairy tale. That blood recognized the moment of her dying and refused to let it happen, wrapping her in a protective cocoon of power that slowed her heart rate, lowered her body temperature to barely above freezing, and put her into a state that was neither truly alive nor completely dead, but something in between. A hibernation so deep that she would appear as nothing more than a corpse to anyone who found her. The golden light faded as Arya's consciousness slipped away, her body curling instinctively into a protective ball as the ancient magic worked to preserve her life against impossible odds. Snow began to cover her rapidly, building up over her still form until she disappeared completely beneath a pristine white drift that gave no indication of the miracle of survival happening just beneath its frozen surface. Hours passed, then a full day, then 2, and still Arya's heart beat once every few minutes, her lungs taking one shallow breath every hour, her body existing in a state of suspended animation that would have fascinated scientists and terrified anyone who understood what it meant to possess such power. Kyle, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, and ruler of more than 40 packs spanning thousands of miles, was not in a good mood as he led his hunting party through the mountain pass 3 days after the storm had finally broken. His wolf was restless, pacing and snarling inside his mind with an agitation that had been building for weeks now, making him short-tempered and aggressive in ways that tested even his legendary control. At 32, he was considered young for a king, having taken the throne when his father died in battle against a rogue army 10 years ago. But no one questioned his right to rule or his capacity for the violence necessary to maintain order among the notoriously fractious wolf packs who would tear each other apart without a strong hand keeping them in line. His second, a massive beta named Cole, who had fought beside him through countless battles, gave him a concerned look as they paused to check the trail markers. The hunting party was officially out here tracking the elk herds that migrated through these mountains every winter. But everyone knew that what Kyle really needed was to let his wolf run free and burn off some of the aggression that had been building in him, like pressure behind a dam. The royal advisors were pushing him to choose a mate, had lined up a dozen suitable candidates from the most powerful families, all strong females who could stand beside a king and give him heirs worthy of the throne. But every time Kale met with one of these prospects, his wolf recoiled with disgust, rejecting each of them so violently that he could barely stand to be in the same room long enough to complete the basic courtesies. Something was coming, his wolf kept insisting. Something important was close, and they needed to find it. But neither man nor beast could identify what that something might be, or where they should look for it. So Kale hunted, drove his body to exhaustion, trying to quiet the incessant restlessness, and tried not to think about the fact that he was beginning to suspect he might be one of those rare alphas who never found their true mate, who went through life with a fundamental piece of themselves missing, because the moon goddess had decided to be cruel, or because their fated mate had died before they could meet, or simply because fate was not as neat and tidy as the old stories like to pretend. The scent hit him like a physical blow, stopping Kale in his tracks so suddenly that Cole nearly collided with him from behind. Every member of the hunting party froze, watching their king with various expressions of concern and confusion as he stood perfectly still, his head raised and nostrils flaring as he tested the wind. It was faint, so faint that he might have missed it entirely if his wolf had not been so desperately seeking. But once detected, it filled his awareness with the intensity of a shout in a silent room. Old magic, royal blood, and beneath those unmistakable markers, the sweet, sharp scent of omega, all tangled together into something that should not exist because the royal lines had died out centuries ago, and everyone knew it. His wolf took control before Cale could even form the intention to shift, the transformation ripping through him with unusual violence as his beast refused to waste even seconds in human form when something so vitally important was nearby. He was running before his paws fully touched the ground, leaving his startled hunting party behind as he followed the scent trail with single-minded intensity. His wolf knew, understood on a level deeper than conscious, thought that they had found what they had been searching for, that their mate was close and in terrible danger, and every second of delay might mean the difference between life and death. The drift looked like 1,000 others scattered across the mountain, just another pile of wind-sculpted snow among countless identical formations. But Cale's wolf went straight to it and began digging with desperate urgency. His massive paws tore through the packed snow, sending white powder flying in all directions as he excavated downward, following the scent that grew stronger with each passing moment, until finally his claws struck something that was not snow or stone, but frozen fabric. He shifted back to human form, ignoring the cold that bit at his bare skin as he used his hands to clear away the remaining snow, his heart pounding with a fear he had not felt in years as he uncovered what lay beneath. She was barely alive, her skin blue-white with cold, her lips frostbitten and her pulse so faint that he had to press his fingers hard against her throat to detect it at all. But she was breathing, and that meant there was still hope. Kyle wrapped her carefully in his arms, shocked by how light she was, how small and fragile she felt against his chest, and let his wolf rise to the surface just enough to flood his body with the intense heat that alphas could generate when necessary. His hunting party had caught up to him by then, staring in shock at the frozen girl their king held with such care, but Cale had no time for explanations or questions. He barked orders for someone to shift and give him their clothes, for the rest to return to the lodge immediately and prepare the medical wing, his voice carrying the absolute authority of command that made even the most dominant wolves in his party scramble to obey without question. Make sure to subscribe to this channel if you want to see how Arya's story unfolds, because her survival is just the beginning of a journey that will shake the foundations of the entire werewolf world. The Royal Hunting Lodge sat in a valley 3 miles from where Cale had found Arya, a massive structure of stone and timber that served as neutral ground where the king could meet with representatives from various packs without the political implications of inviting them to the capital city. It had medical facilities that rivaled anything in the main palace, staffed by healers who specialized in treating everything from common injuries to the rare magical ailments that still plagued shifterkind despite centuries of advancement. The head healer, an older female named Dr. Sarah Chen, who had served Cale's father before him, took one look at the frozen Omega in her king's arms and immediately cleared the primary treatment room, shouting orders to her staff as she directed Cale to place the girl on the examination table that had been specifically designed to accommodate wolf body temperatures. Cale refused to leave, standing against the eye, Wall with his arms crossed, and his expression daring anyone to suggest he should go, as Dr. Chen and her team worked with efficient urgency to stabilize their unexpected patient. They cut away the frozen dress, revealing a body that showed signs of prolonged malnourishment and older injuries that had healed poorly, evidence of abuse or at minimum severe neglect. The Omega's feet were torn and bloody, suggesting she had walked a considerable distance before collapsing, and there were bruises on her arms that looked distinctly like finger marks, like someone had grabbed her hard enough to leave impressions. But beneath all the damage and trauma, Dr. Chen could see what Cale had already sensed, the unmistakable markers of royal bloodline that manifested in the faint golden undertone to the girl's skin and the unusual bone structure of her face that spoke of ancient lineage. The healing took hours, a delicate process of warming the body slowly enough to prevent shock while simultaneously using magic to repair the worst of the damage that the cold had done to her extremities. Dr. Chen worked with the focused intensity of someone who understood that she was treating not just another patient, but someone who mattered deeply to her king, though she wisely kept her observations about the nature of that importance to herself for the moment. Cole stood guard outside the medical wing, turning away the various advisors and officials who showed up demanding to know what was happening. Why? The king had abandoned the hunt. And who exactly was the mysterious Omega that had everyone in such an uproar? When Arya finally opened her eyes 3 days later, the first thing she saw was a ceiling made of dark timber beams and golden lamplight. Nothing at all like the white sky and falling snow that her last conscious memory contained. Her body felt strange, simultaneously heavy and light, warm for the first time in what seemed like forever, but also different in ways she could not immediately identify. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it, as pain lanced through her muscles and a wave of dizziness made the room spin sickeningly. A hand on her shoulder, large and warm and surprisingly gentle, pressed her back down onto the soft surface beneath her. The man sitting beside her bed was the most beautiful and terrifying thing Arya had ever seen. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall even seated, with shoulders broad enough to block out most of the light from the lamp behind him. His hair was dark, almost black, cut short on the sides but longer on top in a style that somehow managed to look both casual and regal. But it was his eyes that captured her attention and held it, pale silver gray like storm clouds or steel, looking at her with an intensity that made her Omega instincts scream warnings about dominant predators and the dangerous game of meeting an alpha's direct gaze. Yet beneath the primal fear his presence invoked, she felt something else, something that resonated in her chest like a plucked string, a recognition that went soul deep and terrified her more than anything else because she had felt this before with Marcus. And look how that had ended. Cale watched his mate wake up and felt his wolf surge forward with possessive satisfaction, wanting to claim her immediately, to mark her throat and bond them so completely that no force in the universe could separate them ever again. But he forced the beast back with iron control, recognizing the fear in her eyes, the way her body tensed as if preparing to flee, despite clearly lacking the strength to even sit up on her own. This close he could smell her properly, Omega sweetness mixed with something sharper and wilder. The scent of power that she either did not know she possessed or had never been taught to access. Every instinct he had was screaming at him that this fragile, broken girl was his, meant for him, the other half of his soul that he had been searching for, without even realizing it. But he could also see the bruises on her arms and the fear in her eyes, and he understood that she had been hurt badly by someone. Probably another wolf, possibly even another mate. He introduced himself with careful formality, Alpha King Cale of the Northern Territories, and watched various expressions flash across her face as she processed that information. Fear and confusion, and something that might have been despair. She told him her name, Arya of the Silver Crest. Pack, her voice rough from disuse and barely more than a whisper. And Cale felt rage build in his chest as he recognized the pack name. Silvercrest was one of his territories, which meant that whoever had hurt this girl, whoever had left her to die on that mountain, was technically his subject and would answer to his justice. He kept his voice calm and gentle as he asked her what happened, how she came to be buried in the snow 3 days' walk from the nearest pack settlement, and watched her. Eyes fill with tears that she clearly hated shedding in front of an alpha. Any alpha, even one who had saved her life. The story came out in broken pieces. Marcus and the fake mate bond. 3 years of manipulation and cruelty disguised as courtship. The drive up the mountain and the betrayal in the storm. Being left to die because she was weak and worthless and an embarrassment. Cale listened without interruption. His expression carved from stone, but his hands clenched so tightly on the arms of his chair that the wood began to splinter under his grip. Marcus Silverton, son of Alpha James Silverton, heir to one of the strongest packs in the north, had attempted to murder his fated mate, and Cale's true mate, had committed one of the most grievous crimes in wolf law, and thought he could get away with it because his victim was a powerless Omega without family or protection. The boy had made a fatal miscalculation. Because Arya was no longer without protection, she was under the direct protection of the king himself. And Chaol was going to make absolutely certain that Marcus understood exactly what that meant before he died. But first, before revenge or justice, or any of the 1,000 other things that needed to happen, Chaol needed to tell Arya the truth about what she was, about the power sleeping inside her that had saved her life and marked her as something far more than the weak Omega everyone had believed her to be. He explained about the royal bloodlines, the lost dynasties that had ruled before the Great Fragmentation, the magic that still ran true in some descendants even after centuries of dilution and mixing. He told her about the golden light that his hunters had seen glowing beneath the snow, about the hibernation state that should have been impossible for any ordinary wolf, about the scent of ancient power that had drawn him to her across miles of frozen wilderness. And then, knowing it might be too much too soon but unable to keep it from her any longer, he told her that she was his true mate, that the bond between them was real and undeniable, and that if she chose to accept it, he would spend the rest of his life making sure that no one ever hurt her again. Arya stared at him in shock, her mind struggling to process everything he had just told her. Royal blood? Ancient magic? True mate to the Alpha King? It sounded like something from a fairy tale. The kind of story that Omegas told each other when they wanted to pretend that their lives might be special or meaningful, instead of just an endless series of submission and service to those higher in the hierarchy. But she could not deny the truth of what her body was telling her. The mate bond that sang between them with a clarity and strength that made what she had felt with Marcus seem like a pale shadow of the real thing. This was what it was supposed to feel like. This recognition that resonated in every cell. This certainty that this person was yours, and you were theirs. And nothing else in the world mattered quite as much as that simple fact. But certainty and desire were not the same as trust. And Arya had learned the hard way that mate bonds could be lies or weapons, or just biology that meant nothing against the reality of power and hierarchy. She told Chaol as much, her voice gaining strength as she forced herself to be honest, even though every Omega instinct screamed at her to submit and agree, and be grateful that an alpha, let alone a king, would want her. For anything. She told him that she had believed in fate once, had trusted in the mate bond and the moon goddess, and all the pretty stories about destined love, and it had nearly gotten her killed. She told him that she did not know how to trust him or any alpha, that the fear was too deep and too recent, and possibly too permanent for her to ever be what he needed in a mate and a queen. Chaol listened to her fear and her honesty, and felt his respect for this small, broken Omega grow into something that looked a lot like admiration. She had every reason to reject him, to fear him, to assume that his interest in her was just another form of predation dressed up in prettier language, and yet she had the courage to say it to his face, instead of simply submitting and hoping for the best. He made her a promise then, solemn and binding in the way of old oaths that wolves still honored, that he would never force the bond on her, never use his authority or power to coerce her acceptance, never do anything that she did not freely choose and enthusiastically consent to. He told her that she could stay at the lodge as long as she needed to heal, that he would provide protection and resources and anything else she required, with no expectation of reciprocation or obligation. And he told her that when she was ready, if she was ever ready, he would court her properly, show her through actions, not words, that she could trust him, that she was safe with him, that the mate bond between them was real and worth believing in. Let me know in the comments if you think Arya should give Chaol a chance, or if she should be more cautious after everything she has been through. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more supernatural romance stories. The weeks that followed were strange and unsettling and unexpectedly peaceful. Arya healed under Dr. Chen's care, her body recovering from the trauma of near death with supernatural speed that the healer attributed to her royal bloodline. Finally waking up properly, she gained weight, filled out into the healthy curves that malnourishment had stolen from her, and found that she had energy and strength she had never possessed before. More surprisingly, she began to manifest abilities that no ordinary Omega should have, including limited telepathy with other wolves, the capacity to generate heat and light from her hands when stressed or frightened, and a natural authority that made even dominant wolves pause and reconsider when she spoke with conviction. Kale kept his promise, maintaining a respectful distance, while still making his interest abundantly clear through 100 small gestures and acts of consideration. He brought her books from the lodge's extensive library. When he learned she liked to read, sat with her during meals and told her stories about the packs and politics of the Northern Territories, invited her to walk with him through the gardens when the weather was clear enough. He never touched her without permission, never pushed for more than she was willing to give, never made her feel like his patience was a loan that would eventually come due with interest. Instead, he simply made space for her in his life, included her in his daily routine, as if she already belonged there, and waited for her to realize that she did belong there, that she fit into the spaces of his life like a key into a lock. But not everyone was happy about the mysterious Omega who had captured the king's attention so completely. Delegations from various packs began arriving at the lodge, supposedly to discuss pack business, but actually to investigate the rumors about Kale's new interest and report back to their alphas. Some came with daughters or sisters, strong females who were presented as much better matches for a king than some random Omega with no pack status or political connections. Others came with barely veiled hostility, suggesting that Kale was being manipulated or enchanted, that no alpha of his standing should debase himself by showing interest in an Omega, no matter what ancient bloodline she supposedly carried. The worst came from Silvercrest, not Alpha James himself but his beta, arriving with a formal complaint about the king holding one of their pack members without cause or explanation, demanding that Arya be returned immediately to face pack justice for abandoning her responsibilities. Kale's response to that particular delegation was swift and terrifying. He shifted in the middle of the formal receiving room, his massive black wolf emerging in a display of power that made every other wolf in the room drop to their bellies in instinctive submission. He stood over the cowering Silvercrest beta and let his rage show, his snarl promising violence and death to anyone who dared threaten what was his. Then he shifted back, stood naked and unashamed among the prostrate wolves, and informed the beta in a voice cold enough to freeze blood that Arya was under his direct and personal protection, that any attempt to remove her from the lodge would be treated as an act of war against the crown, and that if Alpha James had concerns about her presence, he should come discuss them in person rather than sending lackeys who clearly did not understand the magnitude of the situation they had walked into. The beta left, humiliated and terrified, and word spread quickly through the Northern Territories that the king had claimed the mysterious Omega as his mate, that she carried royal blood and ancient power, and that anyone who threatened her would face the full weight of royal justice. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Packs that had been preparing to challenge Kale's interest fell silent, reconsidering their positions in light of the clear political implications. Families that had been pushing their daughters withdrew their suits, unwilling to position themselves in opposition to a bonded mate. And Silvercrest went very quiet indeed, as Alpha James, presumably, scrambled to figure out how his son's actions had brought them all to the edge of war with the crown. Arya watched all of this unfold with a mixture of awe and terror. She had never had anyone defend her before, had never been important enough for anyone to risk anything on her behalf, and the fierce protectiveness that Kale showed toward her was both thrilling and frightening in its intensity. Part of her wanted to run, to remove herself from the political firestorm she had inadvertently created, to go back to being invisible and powerless, because at least then she understood the rules and her place in the hierarchy. But another part, the part that was connected to the ancient power now fully awake inside her, refused to accept that small, invisible existence ever again. She had survived the mountain, had discovered that she was so much more than the weak Omega everyone had believed her to be, and she was done apologizing for existing. It was Dr. Chen who finally pushed Arya toward the decision she had been avoiding. The healer sat with her one evening, brought tea in comfortable silence, and then asked her a simple question. What did she want? Not what she thought she should want, not what would be safest or easiest or least likely to cause problems. But what did her heart actually desire when she was honest with herself? Arya tried to deflect, to talk about the political complications, or her fear of trusting another mate, or the 1,000 other reasons why. Accepting Kale's courtship was probably a terrible idea, but Dr. Chen just waited, patient and knowing, until Arya finally admitted the truth. She wanted him. Wanted the mate bond and the life he was offering. Wanted to believe that she could be a queen and a partner to a king. Wanted to stop being afraid all the time and start living like she deserved happiness. The next morning, Arya sought out Kale and found him in his study, reviewing reports and correspondence with the focused intensity he brought to all his responsibilities. She stood in the doorway until he looked up. And then she said the words that would change both of their lives. She wanted to accept the mate bond. Wanted to try this courtship and see where it led. Wanted to give them a chance to become what fate had apparently always intended them to be. Kale was across the room in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms with a gentleness that contradicted his size and power, pressing his face against her neck and breathing in her scent like a man who had been drowning and just found air. He whispered promises against her skin, swore oaths of protection and devotion, told her that he would prove himself worthy of her trust every single day for the rest of their lives. The formal courtship began, conducted according to the old traditions that governed how alphas pursued their chosen mates. Kale presented Arya with gifts that represented his commitment, jewelry that had belonged to his mother, books that revealed his interests and values, weapons that acknowledged her right to defend herself and stand as his equal. He took her into the mountains to run with his wolf, shifting together for the first time and experiencing the pure joy of 2 mates moving as one through the wilderness. He introduced her to the pack councils, presented her formally to the advisors and officials who would become her allies and enemies in the political landscape of royal life, made it clear through word and deed that she was not just his mate, but his chosen partner in ruling the territories. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see whether Arya and Kyle's mate bond survives the challenges that are coming, because Silvercrest is not going to give up quietly, and there are other threats gathering in the shadows. But even as their bond grew stronger, and Arya began to embrace her new role, the threat from Silvercrest loomed larger with each passing week. Marcus had not remained idle after learning that his victim had survived and was now under the king's protection. He had spent those weeks building alliances, calling in favors, and constructing a narrative that painted Arya as a dangerous manipulator who had used forbidden magic to enchant the king and destabilize the natural order of pack hierarchy. He convinced his father that the only way to preserve Silvercrest's honor and prevent war with other packs who feared the implications of an Omega with royal power was to formally challenge Arya's right to mate with Kale, using ancient laws that allowed disputed bonds to be tested through trial by combat. The challenge arrived in the form of an official delegation, not just from Silvercrest, but representing a coalition of 12 packs who all shared concerns about the precedent that Kale's choice of mate would set. They came with lawyers and pack historians, with documents and precedents, building a case that an unmated Omega with questionable loyalty to any pack could not legally bond with the Alpha King without first proving her worthiness through the traditional trials. The trials were brutal and archaic, designed in an era when might made right and the strong ruled through force alone, consisting of 3 challenges that tested combat prowess, political cunning, and leadership capability. They were meant for strong alphas and dominant betas who sought to rise above their station, not for Omegas, which was exactly the point. Marcus and his coalition were counting on Arya being unable to complete the trials, which would give them legal grounds to separate her from Kyle and remove the threat she represented to the established hierarchy. Kyle's rage when he heard the terms of the challenge was spectacular, his power filling the throne room like a physical pressure that made windows crack and strong wolves whimper in submission. He declared the challenge invalid, pointed out that every precedent they cited was centuries old and had been superseded by modern law, threatened to strip pack status from anyone who supported such obvious manipulation of the legal system. But Arya, standing beside him with a calm she did not entirely feel, placed a hand on his arm, and told him that she would accept the challenge. She would face the trials, would prove that she had every right to stand beside him as maid and queen, would show every wolf in the Northern Territories that she was done being underestimated and dismissed. The first trial was combat, a fight to submission against a champion chosen by the challenging packs. Marcus volunteered himself, stepping into the arena with a confidence born from years of training and a lifetime of being told he was superior by virtue of his birth and gender. He expected an easy victory, probably imagined that he would finally rid himself of the Omega who had somehow survived his attempt to kill her, and now threatened to destroy everything he had built. What he got instead was a shock that reverberated through every wolf watching. Arya fought like someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove, her movements enhanced by the royal power that now flowed through her freely. She was faster than any Omega should be, stronger than her size suggested, and absolutely fearless in a way that spoke of someone who had already faced death and found it less frightening than living as a victim. The fight lasted less than 5 minutes, ending when Arya caught Marcus by the throat and slammed him into the ground with enough force to crack the stone beneath him. She leaned down, her face close to his, and told him in a voice that carried clearly to every witness that she survived, that his attempt to kill her had failed, and that she was done being afraid of predators who wore the face of protectors. Then she released him and walked away, leaving him gasping and humiliated in the center of the arena, his reputation as a strong alpha heir shattered beyond repair. The second trial was political, a test of her ability to navigate the complex web of alliances and rivalries that defined pack relationships. She was given a scenario: 2 packs on the verge of war over a territorial dispute, both with legitimate grievances, both threatening to drag multiple other packs into the conflict if their demands were not met. She had 1 week to propose a solution that both sides would accept, with pack representatives actively working against her and feeding false information designed to lead her toward catastrophic mistakes. Arya approached the problem not as a politician, but as someone who understood what it meant to be powerless, who knew how easily the weak became collateral damage in conflicts between the strong. She spent the week listening more than talking, visiting both territories, and speaking with ordinary pack members, rather than just the alphas and their advisors, building a picture of the real issues beneath the surface posturing. Her solution surprised everyone. Instead of trying to adjudicate the territorial dispute directly, she proposed the creation of a neutral zone administered jointly by both packs, with revenues from resources in that zone split according to a formula that took into account both historical claims and current need. More radically, she suggested that pack members from both sides be allowed to relocate to the neutral zone if they chose, forming a new mixed community that would serve as a bridge between the 2 groups and create familial connections that would make future war less likely. It was innovative and risky, requiring both sides to give up some control in exchange for long-term stability, but it worked. Both alphas, worn down by years of conflict and genuinely tired of the constant threat of violence, agreed to try the experiment. The third trial was the hardest, a test of leadership that required Arya to take command of a pack for 1 full day and successfully manage whatever challenges arose. The coalition made sure that the day would not be easy, arranging for multiple crises to occur simultaneously, forcing her to delegate authority, make difficult decisions quickly, and handle the kind of chaos that alphas dealt with regularly. There was a rogue attack on the eastern border, a dispute between pack members that threatened to turn violent, and a delegation from a neighboring pack arriving unexpectedly with demands and veiled threats. Arya drew on everything she had learned from watching Kyle lead, from her own experiences being on the receiving end of bad leadership, and from the royal instincts that told her how to read people and situations with preternatural accuracy. She handled each crisis with a combination of firmness and compassion that impressed even her harshest critics. She organized the defense against the rogues, but also demanded to know why rogues were attacking in the first place, uncovering information about a group of displaced wolves who had been forced from their territory by illegal hunting operations and had nowhere else to go. She resolved the dispute between pack members by actually listening to both sides and identifying the underlying issue that had nothing to do with the surface argument they were having. And she met with the difficult delegation, not as a supplicant seeking approval, but as someone who understood power and was not afraid to wield it when necessary, making it clear that while she would negotiate in good faith, she would not be bullied or intimidated. When the third trial ended and the results were tallied, even the most skeptical observers had to admit that Arya had proven herself beyond any reasonable doubt. She had won the combat trial decisively, had solved a political problem that had stumped experienced diplomats, and had led a pack through a day of crisis without a single major failure. The coalition that had challenged her right to mate with Chaol withdrew their objection, and while some did so grudgingly, it was clear that public opinion had shifted dramatically in her favor. She was no longer just the weak Omega who got lucky, or the king's plaything who would be discarded eventually. She was a legitimate power in her own right, someone who combined Omega empathy with royal authority in a way that made her uniquely qualified to stand beside Chaol as his equal. Please like this video if you are enjoying Arya's journey from powerless victim to powerful queen, and let me know in the comments what you think should happen to Marcus and the Silvercrest pack for what they tried to do. The mating ceremony took place 2 weeks later, conducted according to ancient traditions under the full moon, with representatives from every major pack in the Northern Territories in attendance. Arya wore white silk that flowed around her like water, her neck bare and vulnerable as tradition demanded, her hair unbound and decorated with silver chains that caught the moonlight. Chaol stood before her in formal ceremonial dress that marked him as king, but his eyes held nothing of political calculation or strategic maneuvering, only raw devotion, and barely contained desire for the woman who had claimed his heart as completely as he had claimed hers. The ceremony itself was both simple and profound, ancient words spoken in the old tongue that few still remembered, oaths and promises that bound them together in ways that went beyond mere legal contract or physical desire. When Chaol finally marked her, his teeth sinking into the sensitive skin where her neck met her shoulder, Arya felt the mate bond snap into place with a force that made her cry out. Pleasure and pain and overwhelming rightness all tangled together. The mark would scar, would brand her permanently as his mate, but more importantly, it completed a circuit between them that would last the rest of their lives, allowing them to sense each other's emotions, to communicate without words, to know always where the other was and whether they were safe. They consummated the bond that night in private, finally allowing themselves the physical intimacy they had been building toward through weeks of courtship and careful trust-building. Chaol was achingly gentle, despite the urgency of his need, taking his time to learn every inch of her body, showing her what mating was supposed to feel like when it was between true partners, rather than one person taking and another submitting. For Arya, it was revelation and reclamation both, discovering that her body could be a source of pleasure rather than just pain. That vulnerability could be strength when shared with someone who treated it as the precious gift it was. In the aftermath, lying tangled together with the mate bond humming contentedly between them, Chaol asked Arya what she wanted to do about Silvercrest, about Marcus and his father, and the pack that had hurt her so badly. He made it clear that the choice was hers, that he would support whatever decision she made, whether that was full legal prosecution or private revenge, or even forgiveness, if that was what would help her heal. Arya thought about it for a long time, examining her feelings with the kind of brutal honesty that she had learned through surviving things that should have killed her. She realized that what she felt toward Marcus was not really hate anymore, but something closer to pity, recognition that he was a product of a system that valued dominance over compassion, and taught young alphas that Omegas were disposable. She chose justice over revenge, but justice on her own terms. Marcus would stand trial for attempted murder, would face the full legal consequences of his actions under wolf law, would spend the next decade in prison learning what it felt like to be powerless and at the mercy of others. His father, Alpha James, would be removed from power for failing to properly oversee his heir and allowing such a grievous crime to occur under his leadership. But Silvercrest Pack itself would not be dissolved or punished collectively, because Arya understood that most of the pack members had nothing to do with Marcus's crime, and did not deserve to suffer for it. Instead, she proposed that Silvercrest be placed under direct royal oversight for 5 years, with new leadership appointed by the king and reforms implemented to address the cultural problems that had allowed abuse to flourish. It was a balanced approach that satisfied the need for accountability while avoiding collective punishment, and it established Arya immediately as someone who understood how to use power wisely. The trial itself was swift and decisive, with evidence of Marcus's crime so overwhelming that even his own pack could not defend him. He stood before the royal court and heard his sentence, and for the first time in his life, he looked genuinely afraid, the casual arrogance stripped away to reveal the weakness beneath. Arya watched him being taken away and felt the last chains of her past breaking, the fear and trauma that had defined her for so long, finally loosening their grip as she realized that she had not just survived, but had transformed into something that Marcus and people like him could never destroy. The years that followed were challenging in ways that had nothing to do with personal survival, and everything to do with the weight of leadership and responsibility. Arya threw herself into her role as queen, with the same determination she had shown in the trials, working alongside Kale to reform the pack systems that had allowed Omegas like her to be abused with impunity. She established new laws that gave Omegas legal protections and recourse when their rights were violated, created education programs that taught young wolves that strength came in many forms, and that the hierarchy should be based on capability and character rather than birth designation alone. She became an advocate for the powerless, using her position and her story to shine light on injustices that had been hidden in shadow for far too long. It was not easy work, and not everyone appreciated her efforts. There were packs that resented the changes she pushed for, alphas who saw her reforms as attacks on the natural order, traditionalists who muttered that letting an Omega have real power would be the downfall of their society. But Arya had Kale's absolute support, and together they were a force that even the most resistant packs could not stand against for long. She also had the backing of ordinary pack members, the Omegas and lower-ranking wolves who had been waiting for someone to acknowledge their worth and give them opportunities to prove themselves. Slowly but surely, the culture began to shift, old assumptions being challenged by new realities, the hierarchy becoming more fluid and merit-based. Arya's royal bloodline manifested more strongly as she grew into her power, her abilities developing beyond the initial manifestations into something truly remarkable. She could heal minor injuries with a touch, could project her emotions into others to calm aggression or inspire courage, could even shield others from physical or magical attacks when necessary. Her golden light became a symbol throughout the territories, a marker of hope and protection, and stories spread about the Omega Queen who had survived the mountain and returned to change the world. Children were named after her. Young Omegas cited her as proof that they could be more than what society told them they had to be, and even alphas began to reconsider their assumptions about the fixed nature of strength and leadership. When Arya became pregnant with their first child 2 years into their reign, the territories held their collective breath, wondering whether the royal bloodline would continue, whether her children would carry the same power that made her unique. The pregnancy was difficult, her body struggling with the demands of growing a child with such concentrated magical heritage, but she survived it with Dr. Chen's expert care and Kale's devoted attention. The daughter they named Luna was born during a full moon, her first cry accompanied by a surge of golden light that filled the birthing room and spilled out into the night sky like a beacon visible for miles. She was perfect and powerful and absolutely loved, not just by her parents, but by an entire kingdom that saw in her the promise of a better future. Make sure you are subscribed to this channel so you don't miss more. Stories like this one about finding strength in survival and love in the most unexpected places. The epilogue to Arya's story is not an ending, but a beginning, because her journey from victim to survivor to queen to mother is ongoing, and will continue for decades to come. She stands on a balcony of the royal palace 5 years after Kale found her dying in the snow, looking out over the territories that are now as much hers as his, holding their daughter while their son plays at her feet. She thinks sometimes about the girl she was, scared and small, and convinced that her life had no value beyond what others decided to give it, and marvels at how wrong she was. That girl is still part of her, the memories and scars never fully fading, but she is so much more now, expanded by love and power and purpose, into someone she never imagined she could become. Kale joins her on the balcony, wrapping his arms around both her and Luna, his presence solid and warm and endlessly reassuring. They stand together as the sun sets over their kingdom. Two mates who found each other against impossible odds. Two rulers who are slowly reshaping the world to be more just and merciful. Two people who prove every day that strength comes in many forms, and that the greatest power is the courage to be vulnerable with someone worthy of that trust. Arya leans back against her mate and feels the bond between them, stronger now than ever, a living thing that grows with each passing year. She survived the mountain, survived the betrayal, survived the trials and challenges that should have broken her. And in surviving, she discovered that she was never meant to be small or invisible or powerless. She was meant to be exactly this: a queen, a mother, a force for change, a symbol of hope for everyone who had ever been told they were less than they actually were. The frozen mountains where she nearly died are visible in the distance, a reminder of where she came from and how far she has traveled. She does not fear them anymore, does not fear much of anything, really, because she has learned that she is capable of surviving things that would destroy others, of transforming pain into power and trauma into triumph. And if she can do that, can remake herself so completely, then maybe the world can be remade too. One law, and one changed mind, and one protected Omega at a time. That is her legacy. Not just the children she will bear, or the years she will rule, but the belief that things can be better, and that even the powerless can find their power if given the chance to discover it. The Northern Territories are changing, becoming something closer to what they always should have been, and at the center of that change is a small Omega, who refused to die when the mountain tried to claim her, who refused to break when fate tested her, who refused to accept that her story was over before it truly began. Arya's story is one of survival and transformation, of finding love in the aftermath, of betrayal, of discovering that the greatest strength is not the power to dominate, but the courage to remain compassionate, even when the world has given you every reason to become cruel. It is a story that will be told for generations, a fairy tale that happens to be true, and it is still being written with each day. She wakes up and chooses to keep fighting for the world she wants to create. Thank you so much for watching this story of survival, love, and discovering your true power. If you enjoyed Arya's journey from left to die in the mountains to becoming a queen who changed everything, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more supernatural romance stories. Leave a comment below telling me what your favorite moment was, or what story you would like to see next. Remember that you are stronger than you think, and that your story is not over, just because someone tried to write an ending you did not choose. See you in the next video.